Tonight we're not talking about the Queen who danced through 45 years of English history like she owned time itself. We're talking about the girls who dressed her. Because here is the thing nobody puts in the portraits. Of every new maid brought into Elizabeth I's private rooms, most of them were gone within 4 weeks, not dead. Worse, in some ways, if you were the sort of girl who needed to eat. Sent home in disgrace, unpaid, unnamed in any record, erased so completely that historians can only guess at how many of them there were. One wrong glance, one dropped pin, one ruff starched half a shade too yellow. That was enough. Tonight you're one of those girls. You have exactly 1 month to survive a woman who could destroy your entire future with a flick of 2 fingers, and you don't know that yet. Not really. Not the way you're about to know it. So get comfortable. Let your body go heavy against whatever you're lying on. And let's go back to a palace outside London in the autumn of 1596, where you're about to learn that serving a queen has almost nothing to do with crowns, and almost everything to do with starch, silence, and fear. The gatehouse at Nonsuch rises up out of the mist before you actually believe it's real. You've heard people describe this palace your whole life. The plaster reliefs of gods and emperors running along every wall, the gilding that catches fire in the sun, the 2 courtyards stacked one behind the other like something too grand for England to have built on its own. Your uncle, who arranged this position through a debt owed to a debt owed to someone else, told you it would be the making of you. He did not tell you that your hands would be shaking so hard by the time you reach the inner gate that the porter has to ask you twice for your letter of introduction. Your fingers are cold. Not autumn cold. Fear cold. The kind that starts in your chest and runs down into your knuckles and won't leave no matter how tightly you fold your arms. The letter is damp from where you've been gripping it since Kingston. The porter, a thick man with a face like a boiled ham, reads it without any particular interest, glances at you the way you might glance at a sack of grain to guess its weight, and jerks his thumb toward a low door set into the base of the second courtyard. "Laundry and wardrobe," he says. "Ask for Mistress Dean, and girl, wipe your shoes. Nobody tracks mud past that door." You wipe your shoes. Your hands are shaking too hard to do it properly, and you end up smearing more mud than you remove, but you don't have time to fix it because a woman is already coming through the low door, and something about the set of her shoulders tells you this is Mistress Dean before she even speaks. She is younger than you expected, 30 perhaps, with a face that has learned to give away nothing and hands that never stop moving. Even now, greeting you, she is folding something invisible, some habit worn so deep into her fingers that they can't stay still. She looks you over in about 2 seconds. Face, hands, hem, shoes. You feel each part of the inspection like a separate small blow. "You're the Fenwick girl." "Yes, mistress. Joan Fenwick." "You've never served in a great house." It isn't a question, so you don't answer it as one. You just stand there while she looks at your hands again, turns them over without asking permission, examines the calluses from years of your mother's kitchen, and finds them acceptable, or at least not disqualifying. "You can sew." "Yes, mistress." "You can hold your tongue." This one you answer too quickly, too eagerly, the way people do when they're lying about something they haven't been tested on yet. "Yes, mistress." Something flickers at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, more like the ghost of one, already gone. "We'll see," she says. "Come." And that's it. That's the entire interview for a position that will consume the next years of your life, if you last. No one asks what you hope for. No one asks if you're frightened. You follow her through the low door into a passage so narrow your shoulders nearly brush both walls, and the smell hits you immediately. Hot linen, scorched starch, the sharp mineral tang of something you don't yet have a name for, and underneath it all sweat. Dozens of women sweat, worked into the stone itself after years of heat and labour in rooms with no windows. This is not a grand household the way you're imagining it, Mistress Dean says over her shoulder, not slowing down. You will not see the Queen for weeks, if you see her at all in your first month. You will see linen, you will see starch, you will see more of the inside of a laundry copper than you ever wanted to see of anything, and you will learn the rules before you learn anything else, because the rules are the only thing standing between you and the end of your position here. Do you understand? Yes, mistress. You don't yet. You will. She stops at a heavy door, turns to face you fully for the first time, and recites something you can tell she had recited to 100 girls before you, the words worn smooth with repetition. First, you never speak first to anyone above your rank, and everyone in this house is above your rank. Second, you never let your shadow fall across a lady, and God help you if it falls across the Queen. You will learn to walk like water finds a path around a stone, always around, never through. Third, whatever you see in the private rooms stays in the private rooms. Not to your mother, not to your priest, not to the man you'll marry someday, if you're fortunate enough to marry well, which you won't be if you can't keep your mouth shut. Fourth, her eyes hold yours now, and there's something almost kind buried under the sternness, the particular kindness of someone who's watched this exact moment ruin dozens of hopeful girls, and is trying, in her clipped way, to spare you the same fate. You never look directly at the Queen's face unless she has looked at yours first. Not in the presence chamber, not in the privy chamber, and above all, not in the bedchamber before she is dressed. This rule matters more than any other rule I will ever give you. Break it and I cannot save you. Nobody can save you. You nod, though you don't understand yet why a glance could matter more than theft, more than insolence, more than any of the 100 ways a servant might fail. You will understand within weeks. Right now you only feel the cold press of the door handle as Mistress Dean pushes it open, and the wall of heat and noise and smell that rolls out to meet you. The laundry room at Nonsuch is a low vaulted space that seems to breathe. Steam hangs against the ceiling in a permanent grey fog, condensing and dripping back down onto the women below in fat, warm drops. 3 great coppers sit against the far wall, fires roaring beneath them, and the women tending them move like they're performing some ancient rite, stirring, lifting, wringing, their forearms slick with sweat and their faces flushed a deep, permanent red that you suspect never fully fades, even in winter, even when they sleep. Starch first, Mistress Dean says, leading you toward a smaller copper set slightly apart from the others, tended by a girl who can't be much older than you, her sleeves rolled past her elbows and a long wooden paddle in her hand. You'll learn starch before you learn anything else, because starch is where the ruffs live or die, and the ruffs are where you live or die. This is Bess. Bess will show you. Bess looks up at you with an expression that is not quite unfriendly, but is very carefully not friendly either. The look of someone who has watched new girls come and go often enough to stop investing in them before they've proven they'll stay. She has a burned scar running along the inside of her left wrist, pale and shiny, and you find your eyes drawn to it before you remember the rule about staring and force them away. Wheat starch, Bess says, nodding at a sack propped against the wall. Best white wheat, nothing else, because anything else clouds and you'll never get the clear stiffness her ruffs need. You boil it slow, too fast and it scorches, and scorched starch smells like burnt hair, and once that smell gets into the linen you might as well throw the whole ruff on the fire because it'll never come out. She dips the paddle into the copper and lifts it, showing you the pale, glossy liquid clinging to the wood, thick as cream. Egg whites go in next for the gloss. Then, she hesitates, glances at Mistress Dean, who nods permission. Then the colour, if she's wanting yellow that week, which she has been, God knows why. It's the devil's own work to get right. Saffron, mostly. Costs more than you'll earn in a year, that little pot there. So you do not spill it, you do not waste it. And if you drop so much as a thread's worth on the floor, you tell me immediately, because I would rather explain a small loss honestly than have someone find it missing and think one of us pocketed it. You nod. Your throat has gone dry despite the steam thickening the air around you. And this, Bess says, holding up a slim wooden rod, one end blunted and smooth from years of handling, is a poking stick. You heat it. Not too hot, you'll learn the heat by feel. Nobody can teach you that part. You just burn yourself a few dozen times until your fingers know. And you use it to set each fold of the ruff into place before the starch dries hard. Every fold by hand, one at a time. A grand ruff might have 400 folds in it. You do the math on how long that takes. 400 folds. You try to imagine holding a hot iron rod steady enough, precise enough, 400 separate times, without a single mistake, and something in your stomach drops. What happens, you ask, before you can stop yourself, if a fold goes wrong? The question hangs in the steamy air a beat too long. Bess and Mistress Dean exchange a look you can't quite read. "Come with me," Mistress Dean says instead of answering, and leads you toward the far corner of the room where a girl, no older than 14 you'd guess, with red-rimmed eyes and a face gone blotchy from crying, is sitting on an overturned bucket staring at nothing, while an older woman packs a small bundle of belongings beside her. "That," Mistress Dean says quietly, "is what happens. She scorched a collar 3 days ago. Just a small brown mark, no bigger than a farthing, on the underside where she thought it wouldn't show. It showed. The Queen does not miss things that show." She watches the girl a moment longer, and something in her jaw tightens. She'll walk to the gate within the hour, and someone will take her back to her family with a letter explaining she was found unsuitable. No wages for this quarter. No character reference for the next position she tries for. 3 days, Joan. That is how fast this can end. You look at the girl on the bucket. She doesn't look up. She has the particular stillness of someone who has already left in every way, except physically, someone whose body is simply waiting for permission to follow her mind out the gate. "I tell you this now," Mistress Dean says, turning back to you, "not to frighten you, though I imagine it has. I tell you because fear, used properly, keeps your hands steady. It's the girls who think they can't fail who fail fastest. Understand that every single thing you touch in this room could be the thing that sends you home in disgrace, and you'll treat every single thing the way it deserves to be treated. With respect, with care, with your whole attention. 'Yes, mistress,' you say. And this time the words come out smaller, stripped of the eager confidence you tried to fake at the gate. 'Good. Now, show me your hands again.' You hold them out. She turns them over, presses her thumb briefly against your palm as though testing for something. No calluses where a poking stick sits. You'll have them by the week's end and blisters before that, and they'll hurt worse than anything has ever hurt you, and you'll keep working through it, because a burned finger heals and a dismissal doesn't. Do you understand? Yes, mistress. Then let's begin. The first burn comes within the hour. Bess sets the poking stick into the coals, pulls it out, tests the heat against a scrap of cloth the way she's shown you twice already, and hands it to you before you feel ready. Your fingers close around the handle, and for one instant it feels like nothing. Warm wood, manageable. And then the heat travels up through the grip faster than you expect, and you flinch, and the tip of the stick drags sideways across the pad of your thumb. You don't cry out. You bite it down, because you've already seen what happens to girls who make themselves noticeable for the wrong reasons, and a whimper over a burn feels like exactly the wrong kind of noticeable. But your eyes water, and Bess sees it, and something in her face softens by a degree you wouldn't have thought possible an hour ago. First one's the worst, she says, taking the stick back from you before you can do more damage. Not because it hurts most, because you don't know yet that it stops hurting. Give it here. She dunks your thumb into a bowl of cold water sitting ready at her elbow. You understand now why it's there, why every station in this room has one, and holds it under until the sting dulls to a throb. You'll have a mark there by winter, she says. Everyone who works starch does. Look. She holds up her own hand and you see it now, a constellation of small pale scars across her fingertips and the heel of her palm, the private geography of years spent close to heat. It isn't ugly, exactly. It's more like a record, proof of survival, written directly into skin. The blister will fill by tonight, Bess continues, wrapping a strip of linen around your thumb with brisk practiced movements. Don't pop it. Let it drain on its own or it'll turn bad, and a bad hand is worse than a burned one, because a bad hand means you can't work at all, and a girl who can't work is a girl who gets sent home to make room for one who can. You nod, cradling your bandaged thumb against your chest, and watch as Bess picks the stick back up, tests it again, and begins working a fresh length of linen into crisp, even folds with a rhythm that looks less like labour and more like something closer to prayer. Repetitive, focused, almost meditative, if meditation ever left blisters. How long, you ask quietly, before you stop feeling it? The burns? All of it. The fear. Bess doesn't look up from her work. The stick moves, fold after fold, precise as a metronome. You don't stop feeling it, she says. You just get better at working while you feel it. That's the whole trade. If you want the truth, nobody tells new girls. Everyone here is frightened all the time. The ones who last are the ones who've learned to let their hands keep moving anyway. The rest of that first day dissolves into a blur of repetition. You learn to test the starch's thickness by dragging 2 fingers through it and watching how the liquid falls back. Too thin, and it won't hold a fold. Too thick, and it clogs into lumps that will crack the fabric when it dries. You learn to skim the surface for scorched flecks before they can work their way into a garment. You learn the particular ache that settles into your forearms after an hour of stirring a copper heavy enough that your whole body has to lean into the paddle, and the way that ache turns by the 4th hour into a kind of numbness that frightens you more than the pain did, because you can no longer quite feel whether you're gripping the paddle correctly or not. By the time the light through the room's single high window has gone the colour of ash, Your hands are trembling from fatigue rather than fear. Your apron is soaked through at the front where steam has condensed and dripped down, and your lower back has developed an ache that feels like it has taken up permanent residence between your shoulder blades. "Enough," Mistress Dean says, appearing at your elbow so silently you startle. "Bess will show you where you sleep." You follow Bess up a narrow, twisting stair. Servant stairs, tucked behind the walls the way the household's whole existence seems to be tucked behind the walls, present everywhere and visible nowhere, and into a long, low garret room lined with narrow beds, most of them already occupied by girls whose faces you can't make out in the dim rushlight. "You'll share with me," Bess says, nodding toward a bed against the far wall. "There's a girl left the space when she was sent home last month. Don't ask which reason. There's always a reason, and none of them are worth repeating before sleep." You lie down without undressing, too tired to manage buttons, and stare up at the low beams of the ceiling, close enough that you suspect you could touch them if you had the strength left to lift your arm. Somewhere below, faintly, you can hear the palace still moving. Footsteps, a door, a burst of laughter cut suddenly short. The sound of a great household breathing even in the dark. "Joan." Bess's voice comes quietly from the next bed over, already half swallowed by exhaustion. "You did well today, for a first day." You want to ask what "well" means here, whether it's a genuine compliment or simply the absence of catastrophe. But sleep takes you before you can form the question, pulling you under so completely that you don't dream at all. The days that follow blur into a single long lesson in precision. You learn that the Queen's ruffs are not simply linen and starch, but a small industry unto themselves, an entire wing of expertise devoted to a single article of clothing that will circle a single neck. You learn the different weights of lawn and cambric, how a ruff meant for the presence chamber must stand taller and stiffer than one meant for private hours, how the yellow starch, the fashionable colour that season, much to Bess's ongoing and colourfully expressed disgust, must be mixed fresh each time because it turns the fabric brittle if left standing, and brittle fabric cracks under the poking stick, and cracked fabric means starting the entire ruff again from a bolt of cloth that costs more than your yearly wage. You learn to recognise Mistress Dean's moods by the set of her shoulders before she says a word. Learn which of the senior laundresses will help you quietly correct a mistake before it's noticed, and which ones will report it immediately to protect their own position. Learn the particular silence that falls over the laundry room whenever word passes that the Queen is in a temper that day. A silence you can feel settle into your own chest before anyone has told you why. Absorbed simply from the tightened jaws and quickened hands of the women around you. And you learn about Marjorie. Marjorie Pace has been in the bedchamber's service for 6 years, which in this world makes her something close to royalty herself, at least among the servants. She is perhaps 25, sharp-featured, with the particular confidence of someone who has survived long enough to stop fearing dismissal, and started, instead, guarding her position the way a dog guards a bone, with teeth bared toward anything that comes too close. She does not like you. You understand this within your first week, though you couldn't say exactly what you did to earn it, beyond simply existing as a newer, younger pair of hands that Mistress Dean has begun, cautiously, to trust with slightly more delicate work. She favoured the last girl who worked your station too, Bess tells you one evening, low enough that Marjorie, 3 stations down, can't hear over the hiss of steam. Girl named Alison. Lasted almost 2 months, which was good going. Marjorie made her life a misery the whole time. hid her poking stick once, right before an inspection, so Alison had to run the whole floor looking while the copper cooled past working temperature. Nearly got her sent home over it. Why does she do it? Bess shrugs, though the gesture carries more weight than casualness. Because someone did it to her, I'd wager, when she was new. That's how it goes in a house like this. Everyone's frightened, and frightened people look for someone smaller to be frightened at instead of the ones actually holding power over them. Can't snap at the queen, can snap at the new girl. You file this away like everything else. A rule not spoken by Mistress Dean, but no less real for that. A rule about the terrain of fear itself, and where it flows when it can't flow upward. 3 weeks in, Mistress Dean decides you've earned enough trust to be brought into the second room. This is how she puts it. Earned enough trust, as though trust were a coin you accumulate one careful action at a time, which, you're coming to understand, is exactly what it is. The second room sits beyond a locked door at the end of the laundry passage, and the moment Mistress Dean unlocks it, you understand why it's kept separate. The smell is different here, sharper. Underneath the familiar scent of linen and starch, there's something mineral and faintly bitter, a smell that makes the back of your throat tighten in a way you can't quite explain. The wardrobe of the body, Mistress Dean says, and there's a different quality to her voice in this room, quieter, more careful, the voice of someone handling something they respect and fear in equal measure. What happens here does not leave this room. Ever. I don't care who asks. Your own mother could be dying and asking with her last breath what the Queen's face looks like unpainted, and you tell her nothing. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Yes, mistress. She leads you to a long table where small pots and vials sit arranged with a precision that reminds you of an apothecary's shelf. A woman you haven't met yet, older than Mistress Dean, with steady hands and eyes that seem to have gone permanently narrow from close work, is grinding something white in a stone mortar, her movements slow and deliberate. This is Mistress Alcock, Mistress Dean says. She oversees the paint. You'll assist her twice a week when she needs extra hands, but you will touch nothing without her direct instruction. Nothing. Am I understood? Yes, mistress. Mistress Alcock glances up at you, assesses you with the same brief, thorough look Mistress Dean gave you at the gate, and returns to her grinding without a word of greeting. Ceruse, she says instead, nodding at the white powder beneath her pestle. White lead and vinegar, ground fine as flour and mixed to a paste. It's what gives the mask its colour. That's what we call it here, the mask, because that's closer to the truth than calling it simply paint. You'll see why. Is it dangerous? The question is out before you can consider whether it's wise to ask it. Mistress Alcock's hands don't stop moving. Everything in this room is dangerous, girl. That's why the door is locked. The lead dulls the skin over years of use. You'll see ladies whose faces have gone grey and pitted beneath the paint, and they cake on more paint to hide the damage the last batch of paint did, and so it goes, layer over layer over layer, for decades. Some say it does worse than that to a person, deeper in the body than the skin. I don't ask questions I don't want answered. I mix what I'm told to mix, and I wash my hands until they crack, and I don't lick my fingers to smooth a brush the way I've seen careless girls do, because that is exactly the kind of mistake that doesn't announce itself for 20 years, and then announces itself all at once. She says this without looking up, without any particular drama, the way you might discuss the weather, and somehow that flatness makes it more frightening than if she'd wrung her hands over it. You'll wash after every session in this room, she continues, Hot water, strong soap, under the nails especially. You'll eat nothing in here, ever. Not so much as a crust of bread, because your hands touch your food, and your food touches your mouth, and I have watched what happens to women who forget that rule for the sake of convenience. You look down at your own hands, already marked with the small burns and calluses of the laundry, and imagine a different kind of damage settling into them, invisible, patient, decades in the making. The wig room is through there. Mistress Alcock gestures with her chin toward a second doorway. You'll learn that next month, if Mistress Dean thinks you're ready. Setting the hairpieces takes a steadier hand than starch does, if you can believe it. One crooked pin, and the whole shape sits wrong, and a wrong-sitting wig is nearly as unforgivable as a scorched ruff. Over the following weeks, you learn the second room the way you learned the first, through repetition, through small failures corrected before they become large ones, through the particular vocabulary of a trade most of England will never know exists. You learn that the paste must be applied in thin layers, each one dried before the next, because a single thick layer cracks like dried mud across skin that moves when it speaks or laughs or frowns, and cracked paint is worse than no paint at all. A visible fracture in the careful architecture of youth the Queen has spent decades constructing. You learn about the egg white glazed over the top to give a smooth shine, about the red ochre mixed with a touch more vinegar for the lips and cheeks, about the comfrey water used to soothe skin left raw and irritated beneath the daily assault of lead and pigment. You learn too, though nobody says it directly, only lets you piece it together from careful half-sentences and averted eyes, that the mask is not vanity in the way a young girl's rouge is vanity. It is armour. It is policy. A queen who shows her age shows weakness to ambassadors circling for any sign that England's long unmarried reign might finally be nearing its close, and so every session in this locked room is, in its own quiet way, a small act of statecraft, performed with a badger hairbrush instead of a treaty. You'll understand it better, Mistress Alcock tells you one afternoon, working a fine brush along the edge of a practice cloth while you watch, once you've seen her without it. Not that you will, mind. Very few of us have, but if you last long enough in this house, you might. What does she look like? Underneath. It's the closest you've come to breaking the fourth rule Mistress Dean gave you on your first day, and you feel the weight of it the moment the question leaves your mouth. Mistress Alcock's brush pauses. Like a woman past 60 who has ruled a kingdom through plots and wars and the deaths of half the people who ever loved her, she says finally. That's what she looks like. And I'll tell you something else, because I think you're the sort of girl who can hold it properly. There's nothing shameful in that face. The shame is entirely England's. For deciding a woman's power depends on how well she hides the years it took her to earn it. You don't have an answer for that. You simply nod and watch the brush resume its careful, patient work and file the thought away alongside everything else you're learning to carry quietly. That behind every rule guarding the Queen's appearance sits not vanity, but survival. The same survival that governs every other room in this palace, from the laundry coppers to the throne itself, just wearing different clothes. There is a third category of linen you learn to handle that first autumn, kept separate from both the grand court ruffs and the household's ordinary washing, and it teaches you more about the true weight of the rule against seeing than either the starch copper or the paint room ever quite manages on its own. The Queen's body linen, the smocks and stockings and small private garments worn against her skin beneath the vast architecture of gown and farthingale and jewel, arrives at a separate, smaller table, set apart even from the wardrobe's usual traffic, handled by only 2 or 3 of the most senior women in the laundry, Mistress Dean among them, and you are permitted near it for the first time only after a full year of proven discretion, and even then only to assist with the boiling and drying, never the folding or the return. You'll notice things here you're not meant to notice, Mistress Dean tells you plainly. The first morning she allows you close enough to the table to help wring a length of fine linen shirting. A queen's body ages the same as any other body, whatever the portraits claim otherwise. You'll see where a seam's been let out to ease a joint gone stiffer than it was a decade past. You'll see mends worked into places no young woman's linen would ever need mending. You see it, and you say nothing, not even to yourself in the privacy of your own head if you can help it, because the habit of noticing has a way of showing on a person's face, even when their mouth stays shut. You nod, understanding by now the particular weight this household places on the difference between seeing and acknowledging, a distinction so fine you'd never have grasped it before your first year here taught you to live inside it. You wring the linen, hang it to dry on a line set apart from every other line in the room, and you do not, in fact, allow your eyes to linger on the small telling mends worked into the fine fabric, though you can't stop your fingers from noticing their careful, expert stitching, even as your gaze stays deliberately elsewhere. It occurs to you, working at that separate table through the following weeks, that this entire enormous household, the starch and the paint and the wigs and the endless careful choreography of appearance, ultimately exists to protect exactly this one small, ordinary, universal truth, that a body wears down with use, the same body no matter whose it is, queen or laundress, and that the whole vast performance surrounding this particular body has been built, layer by expensive, exhausting layer, specifically to keep that one plain fact from ever being spoken aloud in any room grand enough for it to matter. The sabotage, when it comes, arrives on an ordinary Tuesday in November, which is somehow worse than if it had come on a day already marked by tension. You've been at Nonsuch 2 months by then, trusted enough to work the yellow starch unsupervised for short stretches, trusted enough that Bess has started leaving you alone at the copper while she runs errands to the linen stores. You are, for the first time since your arrival, beginning to believe you might actually survive here. You're setting folds into a ruff meant for the presence chamber, the poking stick warm and familiar in your hand now, your grip steady in a way it wasn't in your first week, when you reach for the small dish of clear starch you'd set aside not 10 minutes earlier and find it gone. In its place, it's a dish you don't recognize, the liquid inside slightly darker, slightly thicker. You don't think anything of it at first. Dishes get moved in a busy room. You assume someone needed the space and set yours aside somewhere you haven't checked yet. You dip the stick, apply it to the next fold, and only realize something is wrong when the fabric beneath the stick doesn't hold its shape the way it should. It stiffens too fast, unevenly, leaving a faint discoloration along the edge that wasn't there a moment before. Your stomach drops before your mind fully understands why. That's not your starch. Marjorie's voice comes from behind you, and there's something in it. Not quite triumph, but close enough to it that your skin goes cold. You turn and see her watching you with an expression carefully arranged into concern. The kind of concern that doesn't reach the eyes. Someone switched the dishes, you say, and even as the words leave your mouth you can hear how they sound, like an excuse, like exactly what a careless girl would say to explain away her own mistake. Switched them, Marjorie repeats. And now Bess is back, and Mistress Dean too, drawn by the change in the room's rhythm, the way every senior woman in this house seems permanently attuned to the smallest disturbance in its surface calm. That's a strange thing to happen, isn't it? Dishes don't switch themselves. You look down at the ruff in your hands, at the faint, uneven stain now working its way deeper into the fabric as the wrong starch sets, and understand with a sick, sinking certainty that the damage is already done, already irreversible, already exactly the kind of small catastrophe that ended Alison's employment before you had even arrived to take her place. Mistress Dean takes the ruff from your hands without a word, holds it up to the light from the high window, turns it slowly. The room has gone very quiet. Even the coppers seem to have lowered their steady hiss, though of course that's only your fear playing tricks on your hearing. "This will not pass inspection," Mistress Dean says finally. "Mistress, I didn't—" You stop yourself because you can already hear how it will sound. Every new girl in the history of this room protesting her innocence the exact same way. The words worn meaningless from overuse before you've even finished saying them. "I know you didn't mix it wrong," Mistress Dean says, surprising you. "I watched you mix your starch myself this morning. It was correct. This," she gestures at the ruined ruff, "is not what you made." Your eyes go, despite every instinct telling you not to Bess, and then, involuntarily to Marjorie, who has arranged her face into something almost sympathetic now, a performance so smooth you'd almost believe it yourself if you hadn't seen the flicker of satisfaction underneath it a moment before. "I don't accuse without proof," Mistress Dean says, and something in the way she says it, looking directly at Marjorie for just a fraction longer than necessary, tells you she has her own suspicions and simply lacks the evidence to act on them. But I will say this to the room once, and I expect it heard by everyone in it. If I find that any woman here has deliberately sabotaged another's work, that woman will be dismissed within the hour, regardless of how many years she has given this household. I don't care whose favourite you are. I don't care how long you've served. Do you understand me? The silence that follows has weight to it, a physical pressure settling over the whole room. The ruff will need to be unpicked and restarted from a fresh bolt, Mistress Dean continues, her voice returning to its usual clipped efficiency. "Fenwick, you'll begin again tonight, after your other duties, and you'll finish it before tomorrow's inspection if it takes you until dawn. This time, you don't leave your station unattended. Not for a moment, not for any reason. Yes, mistress." You spend that night hunched over a fresh length of cambric, your eyes burning with exhaustion, your hands aching in the particular deep way that comes not from any single injury, but from hours upon hours of sustained, careful tension. Bess stays with you past midnight, though she doesn't have to, feeding the fire beneath your small private copper and handing you fresh poking sticks as the old ones cool, and somewhere around the 300th fold, working in the flickering light of a single rushlight, you understand something you hadn't fully grasped before. This isn't only about starch and pins and the particular chemistry of egg whites and saffron. It's about learning to survive inside a system built almost entirely of other frightened people, all of them protecting whatever small territory they have managed to claim, some of them kind about it and some of them not. And the difference between the two often has nothing to do with how much power they actually hold, and everything to do with how much fear they're carrying that they haven't found anywhere safe to put down. You finish the ruff an hour before dawn. It passes inspection. Marjorie says nothing to you for a week afterward, but you notice once or twice Mistress Dean's gaze lingering on her A beat too long during the morning distribution of tasks, the kind of watching that doesn't announce itself but doesn't stop either. You never find proof, you never need to. The dishes don't get switched again. Winter brings a different kind of danger, one that has nothing to do with rivalry and everything to do with the raw physics of the room you work in. These starch, once dried and set with the hot alum that gives the ruffs their particular unyielding stiffness, become something close to kindling. You learn this the hard way on a bitter evening in January, when a careless page carrying a lit taper too close to the drying racks brushes the flame against the edge of a finished ruff, and the whole thing catches with a soft, terrible whoomph of orange light. You are closest. You don't think. Your body simply moves, snatching the woolen cloth kept by every station for exactly this purpose, and smothering the flame before it can climb from the ruff to the rack to the dozen other pieces hanging beside it, each one just as dry, just as ready to burn. The fire dies under the cloth in seconds, leaving only a curl of grey smoke and the sharp, acrid smell of scorched starch and singed linen filling the low room. Your hands are shaking, not from a burn this time, the cloth protected you, but from the pure animal fear of what almost happened, the vision that flashed through your mind in the half-second before you moved, of the whole drying rack going up, then the shelf of oil-soaked cloths beside it, then the low wooden ceiling just above your head. "Good girl," Mistress Dean says, arriving at a near run and surveying the small ruin of blackened fabric with an expression that shifts, in the space of a breath, from alarm to something like relief. "Fast hands. That's twice now you've shown me fast hands. Remember this feeling, Fenwick. This is why we never leave a lit taper unattended near the drying racks, why the woolen cloth stays at every station whether you think you'll need it or not. A laundry fire in a house this size doesn't stay a laundry fire. It becomes the whole wing. It becomes the whole palace if the wind's wrong. The page who caused it is sent away in disgrace before the week is out. Not to his family in shame the way the ruined collar girl was, but reassigned to some distant, unglamorous corner of the household where his carelessness can do less damage. You think about him sometimes in the weeks that follow, a boy no older than you, whose entire future shifted course because of one moment's inattention with a candle, and you understand a little more clearly the invisible net of consequence stretched taut beneath every task in this palace, waiting to catch anyone whose attention wavers even briefly. Your own reward for fast hands is smaller and stranger than you expected. A half day, granted by Mistress Dean with the gruff efficiency of someone uncomfortable expressing gratitude directly. "Go see something of the palace besides the laundry room," she says. "You've earned an afternoon that isn't spent over a copper. Bess takes you up through a servant's passage you've never used before. Narrow stone stairs spiralling up past floor after floor until you emerge, breathless, onto a walkway along the upper reaches of one of Nonsuch's famous towers, the same towers whose gilded, storied facades you gaped at from the gatehouse on your first terrified day here. The view stops the breath in your chest more completely than the climb did. Below you, the twin courtyards of the palace spread out in their careful geometric grandeur, the elaborate plasterwork you can only half see from ground level now visible in its full, dizzying detail. Panels depicting ancient gods and Roman emperors, gilded so heavily that even the pale winter sun sets them faintly aglow. Beyond the palace walls, the deer park rolls away toward the horizon in long frosted swells of grass and bare trees, dark shapes of deer moving unhurried across the white, and further still the smoke of Yule and the smaller villages threading up into a sky gone the particular hard blue of a cold, clear January afternoon. They say the king who built this wanted to outdo every palace in France, Bess says, coming to stand beside you at the parapet. Wanted something that would make foreign ambassadors go home and tell their masters that England had money and taste enough to shame the whole continent. Cost so much building it that they had to melt down monastery bells to pay for the stone. You think of the 400 folds in a single ruff, the hours of your own aching hands, the lead paste ground fine in a locked room down below, and understand, standing up here with the wind cutting cold across your face, that this whole glittering structure, the palace, the court, the endless careful performance of magnificence, rests on exactly this kind of invisible labour. Thousands of hands like yours and Bess's and Mistress Alcock's, working unseen in low rooms so that above, in the great chambers, everything can appear effortless. Nobody admiring the Queen's ruff in the presence chamber thinks about the girl who burned her thumb, setting its 400th fold. That absence, you realise, is the whole point. The labour is meant to disappear entirely into the result. Do you ever wish you could see her, you ask? Actually see her, I mean. Not just the wig on its stand or the paint on the practice cloth. Bess considers this for a long moment, her breath fogging in the cold air. I saw her once, my first year here. She passed through the laundry passage by mistake. Wrong turn, I suppose, though I can't imagine the Queen taking a wrong turn in her own palace. More likely she wanted to see for herself where her linens came from. Whole room went still as death. Nobody breathed. She didn't look at any of us. Walked straight through with 2 ladies trailing behind her, out the far door, gone in under a minute. What was she like? Smaller than I expected, and faster. Everyone talks about her like she's some great slow-moving statue of majesty, but she moved like someone half her age, quick and sharp-eyed, taking in the whole room in about 2 seconds the same way Mistress Dean takes in a new girl at the gate. Bess pauses. I think that's what frightened me most. Not the grandness, the attention. You got the sense nothing in that room escaped her noticing, down to the crooked seam on my apron, though she never said a word about it. Below, a bell begins to toll somewhere in the palace, marking the hour, and Bess sighs and pushes back from the parapet. Come on, half-days don't last forever, and Mistress Alcock wanted extra hands in the wig room before supper. You take one last look at the view, the frosted park, the gilded towers, the smoke of distant villages where people are living lives entirely untouched by starch and lead paste, and the particular exhausting choreography of royal service, and follow Bess back down into the narrow stone stair, back down into the warm, close, dangerous world where you've somehow, against every fear you carried through the gate 2 months ago, begun to belong. Spring brings the progress, and nothing in the laundry room has prepared you for what it means to move an entire royal household across the English countryside. You'd imagined, vaguely, something like a large family packing for a journey. Trunks, carts, perhaps a day or 2 of inconvenience. The reality is closer to dismantling a small city and rebuilding it, whole, 40 miles away, every few weeks, for the length of an entire summer. The laundry alone requires its own train of carts. The great coppers themselves, too heavy and too essential to leave behind, packed in straw against the jolting of rutted roads, sacks of wheat starch, barrels of saffron and alum bought fresh for each stop because nothing keeps well enough to travel the whole season. Every poking stick, every drying rack, every last pin from the wig room because a queen does not travel without the full architecture of her appearance intact and ready to be reassembled the moment she arrives. You spend 3 days before the first departure packing linens with a precision that makes your earlier training feel gentle by comparison. Every ruff wrapped in its own paper, every gown folded along lines marked in chalk so it won't crease wrong and require reworking on arrival. Every piece labelled and cross-referenced against a list Mistress Dean guards like a state secret, because a missing item discovered 40 miles from where it was lost is not a small problem. It is a crisis that reaches, eventually, all the way up to the Queen herself, who does not react well to the discovery that some article of her wardrobe has simply vanished into the gap between two households. The journey itself tests a part of your endurance the laundry room never touched. You walk alongside the cart carrying the coppers for the better part of 2 days, because there isn't room to ride and because someone must watch the load every mile of rutted road, ready to shout a warning the instant a wheel drops into a hole deep enough to crack the iron. Your feet blister inside boots that were never meant for this kind of distance. Dust from the road works its way into your hair, your eyes, the creases of your knuckles, until you feel less like a person and more like something slowly being ground down and reshaped by the journey itself. And at the far end of it, arriving at whatever grand house has been chosen to host the court for the coming weeks, there is no rest. The household descends on the place like a controlled flood, every room reassigned, every piece of the travelling wardrobe unpacked and inspected for damage from the road. The coppers set up fresh, fires lit, starch mixed, and within hours, sometimes within a single exhausting day, the whole apparatus must be standing ready again, indistinguishable in its function from the one you left behind, as though the Queen had simply stepped through a door rather than crossed 40 miles of English summer. You remember one particular arrival more vividly than any other, at a great house whose owner has spent a small fortune preparing for a visit he's known about for less than a fortnight, because the Queen's progress rarely gives its hosts more warning than that, and the scramble of a household unused to this scale of demand is its own small spectacle. You watch unfold with the detached, weary sympathy of someone who has seen it many times before. The gates stand open when your cart finally rolls through, torches already lit along the drive though the sun hasn't fully set, and every window of the house blazes with candlelight arranged, you suspect, more for impression than necessity, an entire year's supply of wax burned through in a single desperate week of preparation. Servants you've never met and will likely never see again after this stay rush, between the cart train and the house's side entrance, carrying trunks too heavy for one person, and hauling them anyway rather than wait for help that isn't coming fast enough. You're set to work within the hour, no time even to find where you'll sleep before the laundry coppers need lighting, the starch needs mixing fresh, from stores that travelled badly and clumped in their sacks, and half the ruffs that survived the journey need repoking, because the jolt of the road worked their careful folds loose somewhere between the last stop and this one. Your hands, blistered from 2 days gripping a cart's side rail, protest every motion, and you work through the protest the way you've learned to work through every ache this household has ever demanded you carry alongside your labour. By full dark, the smell of the house has changed entirely from whatever it was before your arrival. Wax and starch and the particular hot mineral tang of a laundry copper working at full capacity, threaded through with the roasting meat smell drifting up from a kitchen equally overwhelmed by the sudden demand of feeding a royal household on a fortnight's notice. Somewhere above you, in rooms you'll never see, the actual court has begun to settle in. The Queen received with whatever grand ceremony her exhausted host managed to assemble, and none of it, the torchlight, the ceremony, the careful bows and rehearsed speeches of welcome would exist at all without the invisible scramble happening below and behind it. The same scramble that will happen again in 3 weeks at the next house and the house after that, all summer long. You get used to it, Bess tells you, collapsing beside you on a narrow cot in whatever borrowed servants' quarters this house has provided, both of you too tired even to remove your shoes. 3rd or 4th summer, your body just learns the rhythm. Walk, unpack, work, collapse, walk again. Sounds miserable saying it plain like that? Isn't exactly. There's something to seeing the country this way that you don't get any other kind of life. I've seen more of England walking beside that laundry cart than most people see in a lifetime. You think about your uncle, who arranged this position and told you it would be the making of you, and you think, lying there with your feet throbbing and your hands raw from 3 days of careful packing, that he was more right than either of you understood at the time, though not in any way either of you could have predicted from the safety of your family's kitchen. The summer wears on this way. Palace to great house to palace again, the seasons folding into each other through the particular lens of your labour. Summer measured not by warmth or harvest, but by how quickly the starch spoils in the heat, requiring fresh batches mixed more often. Autumn measured by the return to winter quarters and the relief of not walking beside a cart for the first time in months. And through it all, threading beneath the surface of every conversation in every servants' hall you pass through, a current of political tension that you absorb the way you absorb everything else in this world, sideways, in fragments, never explained directly but understood eventually through sheer repetition. Ireland, mostly. The name comes up again and again through that 2nd year, spoken in the particular tight voice people use for things that frighten them without quite understanding why. There is a war there that will not end, an earl sent to end it who seems, by every account filtering down through the household gossip, more interested in his own glory than in actually finishing the campaign, and a queen whose patience, never generous to begin with according to everyone who has served her longer than you have, is fraying visibly under the strain of watching money and men disappear into a conflict with no end in sight. The Earl's name is Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, and you learn it the way you learn most things in this house, through the particular quality of silence that falls whenever it's mentioned near anyone senior enough to have an actual opinion worth guarding. He is, by every account, the most beloved man at court after the Queen herself. Handsome, brilliant, reckless in a way that seems to charm as often as it alarms, and also, increasingly, the source of attention in the royal household that even you, tucked away in the laundry rooms and wardrobe passages, can feel gathering like weather before a storm. She loves him like a favourite son and hates him like a rival, both at once, Mistress Alcock tells you one evening in the wig room, working a fine comb through a hairpiece with more force than the task strictly requires. I've heard her fury over that man rattle the windows of a presence chamber 2 floors above where I sat, and I've seen her weep, actually weep, which she does for almost nothing and no one, over some slight he'd suffered from another courtier. It's not a healthy thing to watch, if you want my honest opinion, which nobody's asked for and I'll deny giving if repeated. You file this away too. Another thread in the vast, invisible tapestry of court feeling you're slowly learning to read, and you don't think much more about it. You have your own concerns, your own steadily improving skill with a poking stick, your own growing, cautious confidence that you might actually be one of the girls who lasts, until the summer of your 3rd year, when the tension finally breaks in a way the whole household feels at once. It happens in a Privy Council chamber you'll never see, over a decision about who should command the army being sent at last to finish the endless Irish War. You hear about it second-hand, then third-hand, the story growing small additional details with each retelling the way stories do when they pass through enough frightened, fascinated mouths, that the Earl, denied his preferred choice of deputy, turned his back on the Queen in open insolence, that she, in a fury unlike anything the older servants can remember, struck him across the ear hard enough to be heard outside the chamber, that his hand went, for one suspended, catastrophic instant, to the hilt of his sword before another lord seized his arm, and the moment passed without becoming the treason it very nearly was. "I have never," Mistress Dean says that evening, and you notice for the first time since you've known her that her hands are not perfectly steady, "heard this house so quiet, every servant in every corridor walking like they're crossing thin ice over a lake. Say nothing about it, not to anyone. This is not gossip we can afford to be seen enjoying. You say nothing about it, but you feel it, the way you've learned to feel every shift in this household's weather, and you understand, without being told directly, that something has cracked between the Queen and the man half of England still adores, and that cracks like that do not simply heal on their own. They widen, and you are about to learn more directly than you have ever wanted to, exactly how far a crack like that can widen before it breaks something no amount of starch or paint can hide. The morning it happens starts like 100 others before it, which is, you'll think back on later, exactly what makes it so unbearable, the ordinariness of it right up until the moment it stops being ordinary at all. It's late September, 1599, and the court has settled at Nonsuch again after the long, exhausting circuit of that year's progress. Everyone grateful for walls that aren't borrowed, for a laundry room whose every corner you know by feel even in the dark. You've been 3 years in this household now, long enough that Mistress Dean trusts you with tasks that would have seemed impossible to your first terrified week, long enough that you no longer flinch at the weight of a hot poking stick, long enough that Mistress Alcock has begun, cautiously, teaching you the finer points of the mask itself rather than simply the grinding and mixing that support it. Which is why you're in the Privy Chamber's antechamber at all that morning, rather than tucked safely away in the laundry passage, carrying a fresh basin of rosewater and comfrey wash toward the inner door, one small errand among the dozens that make up the elaborate silent machinery of the Queen's morning toilette, a machinery you understand now from the inside the way you understand nothing else in this world. The rule, drilled into you from your very first day, governs this hour above every other hour in the palace's whole daily rhythm. Before the mask is applied, before the wig is set, before the careful architecture of youth and majesty is built layer by layer onto the face and body of a woman past 60 years old, no one enters the Privy Chamber who has not been expressly summoned. No ambassador, no counsellor, no favourite, however beloved, however accustomed to walking unannounced through doors closed to lesser men. This is the 1 hour of the day the Queen belongs entirely to herself, unwitnessed, ungoverned by the performance that consumes every other hour of her reign, and the household guards that hour the way a fortress guards its innermost keep. You're perhaps 10 feet from the inner door, the basin balanced carefully against your hip when you hear it. Boots on stone, moving far too fast, far too heavy for any of the household's usual soft-footed traffic, and beneath the boots, a voice, raised, already speaking before whoever it belongs to has even reached the door. The particular reckless momentum of a man who has stopped thinking about consequences somewhere several miles back on the road that brought him here. You don't have time to understand what's happening before it's already happening. The door, the same door you've watched 100 careful silent servants ease open by inches, the same door that governs the whole sacred boundary between the Queen's public performance and her private self, swings open hard enough to crack against the wall behind it, and a man strides through, travel mud still on his boots, his clothes rumpled from what must have been days of hard riding, his face flushed with an urgency that has clearly outrun every instinct of caution that should have stopped him at the threshold. You know him instantly, though you've never seen him this close before. Nobody in this household could fail to know the Earl of Essex, and behind him, through the open door, for one suspended catastrophic second before every servant in the antechamber moves at once to try to shield the sight, you see her. The Queen sits at her small mirror table, and she is not the woman England knows. Her hair, what remains of it thin and grey, cropped close beneath where the wig usually sits, hangs loose and sparse around a face utterly bare of paint, pale and lined and unmistakably, devastatingly old, the face of a woman who has ruled a kingdom for 41 years and carried the full physical cost of it without once, until this instant, being seen to carry it. Her eyes, when they find the Earl standing in her doorway, widen with a shock so total it strips away, for just that one unguarded second, every particle of royal composure that has held this entire household together for as long as you've served in it. Then the moment breaks. Every instinct in the room fires at once. A lady rushing to draw a cloth across the mirror, another moving bodily between the Queen and the door. Mistress Dean's voice somewhere behind you, snapping an order you don't fully register, because your whole body has gone rigid with the horror of understanding exactly what you've just witnessed, and exactly what the rule you broke by seeing it means for everyone standing near that door right now, yourself included. The Earl, to his credit, or perhaps simply to the credit of whatever instinct for self-preservation finally catches up with his momentum, drops to his knees the instant he registers what he's walked into, already speaking words of apology and explanation tangled together. Something about Ireland, about needing to explain himself before his enemies could poison her against him, about riding through the night without stopping, because he could not bear the thought of one more hour under suspicion he hadn't answered in person. The Queen's voice, when it comes, is not loud. That's what strikes you most, standing frozen with the basin still balanced against your hip, rosewater trembling at its rim from the shaking you can't quite stop in your own hands. You'd expected fury to sound like fury, like the temper the whole household has learned to read in the set of her shoulders and the sharpness of her step on the days word passes down that she is not to be crossed. Instead, her voice comes low, controlled, terrible in a way that raw volume never could have managed. The voice of a woman doing furious, precise arithmetic behind eyes that have already, in the space of a few seconds, calculated every possible consequence of what has just been seen and by whom. "Leave us," she says, and the word cuts through the room like the poking stick's heat cuts through cold linen, and every servant present, you included, moving so fast the basin nearly slips from your grip, is out through the antechamber door within seconds, leaving the Queen and the kneeling Earl alone behind a door that this time someone remembers to close completely. You don't remember walking back to the laundry room. You remember standing at your station afterward with the basin still in your hands. Rosewater long since gone still. Your whole body locked in a kind of paralysis that Bess has to physically break by prying your fingers, one at a time, off the basin's rim. Joan, look at me. Set it down. You set it down. Your hands are shaking so badly the water sloshes over the edge and onto the stone floor, and you stare at the small dark stain spreading across the flagstones as though it might somehow explain what has just happened to you, what you have just seen, what the seeing might now cost you. I saw her, you say, and your voice comes out smaller than you intend, younger than the 3 years of hardened service you'd thought you'd built up around yourself. Bess, I saw her face, without the mask, without anything. Bess's own face goes carefully, deliberately blank. The particular blankness of someone absorbing dangerous information and immediately deciding to know as little about it as possible. Did anyone see you seeing? I don't know. There were so many of us in the antechamber, everyone moving at once. Then that's what you tell yourself, and it's what you tell anyone who asks, if anyone asks, which they might not, because half that household has more reason than you to want this morning to simply never have happened at all. Bess grips your shoulders, hard enough that you feel it through the fog of shock still wrapped around you. Listen to me. You did not see anything. You were carrying a basin. There was commotion. You left the room when told to leave the room, same as everyone else. That is the whole of your account if it's ever asked for, and you do not embellish it. Not to me, not to Mistress Dean, not to God himself if he decides to inquire. Do you understand? Yes, you say, though your understanding at that moment is more instinct than actual comprehension. The animal understanding of a creature that has just narrowly avoided a trap, and knows, without being able to articulate why, that silence is the only safe ground left to stand on. The household spends the rest of that day in a state you can only describe as held breath. No one speaks above a murmur. Tasks that would normally draw idle conversation, the folding of linens, the mixing of starch, proceed in a silence so complete you can hear the individual creak of floorboards 2 rooms away. Mistress Dean moves through the laundry passage twice that afternoon, her face set in expression you've never seen on her before. Not stern exactly, but watchful in a new and specific way, counting heads, you realise eventually, taking a private inventory of exactly who was present in that antechamber, and who therefore now carries a piece of knowledge dangerous enough to end a career, or worse, with a single careless word in the wrong company. She comes to you that evening, after the laundry fires have been banked and most of the household has retreated to whatever rest they can manage. She doesn't summon you formally, doesn't make a scene of it, simply appears at your elbow the way she has 100 times before, and asks you quietly to walk with her along the servants' passage rather than up to the garret. You were in the antechamber this morning. It isn't a question, so you don't try to answer it as one. Yes, mistress. What did you see? What did you think of Bess's instruction, the careful, deliberately narrow account you're meant to give, and you find, standing there in the dim passage with Mistress Dean's steady gaze fixed on you, that you cannot quite bring yourself to lie to her directly, not after 3 years of her particular unglamorous kindness. The burn ointment and the half-day off and the quiet defence she offered you the day Marjorie switched your starch. I saw enough, you say carefully, to understand why the rule exists. I won't say more than that, mistress. Not to you, not to anyone. Something in her face shifts. Relief, you think, though it's gone almost as quickly as it appears, folded back beneath her usual careful composure. Good answer, she says. The correct answer, and I mean that in every sense of the word correct. There will be an inquiry of sorts over the coming days. Not a formal one, nothing so clumsy as that, but questions asked quietly of everyone who is present to determine who can be trusted to have seen nothing worth repeating and who cannot. She pauses, and for a moment the exhaustion of the day shows plainly on her face. 3 years' worth of careful guardianship briefly visible beneath the professional mask she wears as completely as the Queen wears her own. I have told them you can be trusted. I would ask that you not prove me wrong. I won't, mistress. See that you don't. 2 girls who were in that room this morning will not be with us by week's end. Not because they saw anything worse than you did, but because someone above me has decided the household is smaller and safer, with fewer people who remember this morning at all. I fought to keep your name off that list. Don't make me regret it. You lie awake a long time that night, listening to Bess's steady breathing in the next bed, replaying the single unbearable second of the Queen's face in your mind. Not the fury that followed, not the cold precision of her voice ordering the room emptied, but that first raw instant of shock, the utter human vulnerability of a woman who has spent 41 years constructing a version of herself, sturdy enough to rule a kingdom, undone in a heartbeat by a man riding too fast and thinking too little. You understand, lying there in the dark, something about power you hadn't fully grasped before, not in 3 years of starch and paint and careful, invisible labour. The mask was never simply vanity, exactly as Mistress Alcock told you months ago in the locked second room. It was the wall between a private woman and the enormous, crushing weight of what the whole of England needed her to be. And this morning, for one unguarded second, that wall came down, and everyone standing near enough to see it happen became, whether they wanted the burden or not, keepers of the single most dangerous piece of knowledge in the entire kingdom. The 2 girls are gone by Friday, sent home with the same brisk, unexplained finality you witnessed happen to the collar-scorching girl in your first week. Except this time, the crime wasn't carelessness with starch, but simple proximity to something too dangerous to be allowed to linger in careless memory. You don't ask which two. You've learned, by now, that some questions are better left permanently unasked. For the Earl of Essex, the consequences unfold more slowly, and you follow them the way you follow every piece of court news that reaches the laundry passage. Second-hand, filtered through a dozen retellings, arriving always a few days behind the actual events, but arriving nonetheless, because a household this size cannot help but breathe the same air as the politics happening 2 floors above it. He is confined to his own house within days, stripped of his official positions within weeks, his glittering popularity with the common people of London curdling over the following months into something the Queen's Council watches with open alarm. Crowds gathering near his residence, pamphlets circulating that speak of him in language uncomfortably close to the language once reserved for kings. You hear all of it in fragments over that winter and the following spring, delivered in the hushed, half-frightened tones the household reserves for anything touching the Earl's name, and you think more than once of the man you saw kneeling on the Privy Chamber floor, mud still on his boots, apologising in a voice gone raw with days of hard riding, and wonder whether he understood even then, kneeling before a woman whose face he had just seen unmade, that he had crossed a line from which no apology would ever fully rescue him. In the weeks following the incident, the household's rules tighten around the Privy Chamber the way a wound tightens into a scar. A second guard is posted at the antechamber door where none stood before. Mistress Dean introduces a new rule you've never heard spoken aloud in your 3 years of service, that any servant entering the antechamber during the morning toilette must announce themselves clearly at the outer door and wait for confirmation before proceeding. A small procedural change that costs you an extra 30 seconds on every errand, and that nobody, not once, complains about, because everyone in that household understands exactly what those 30 seconds are meant to prevent from ever happening again. You notice other changes too, smaller ones, the kind only visible to someone who has spent 3 years learning to read this world's silent grammar. The Queen herself seems, in the months after, subtly altered, not diminished, never that. Her temper as sharp and her presence as commanding as it has always been. But there is something new beneath it, a wariness perhaps, or simply the visible cost of having been reminded in the cruelest possible way that even a fortress built over 40 years can have exactly one unguarded door. Mistress Alcock works with more care than ever in the paint room that winter, if such a thing is possible, testing new formulations for the mask that dry faster, hold longer, require fewer of the vulnerable unpainted minutes between waking and the completed performance of the day. She wants the wall built faster now, Mistress Alcock tells you one evening, mixing a new batch of ceruse with a precision that borders on ritual. Understandable, I suppose, though I worry what it costs her skin, rushing what used to take its proper time. But I don't argue with what a frightened woman asks of her own armour. None of us are in a position to. You are 20 by the following spring, 4 years into a position you once feared you'd lose within a month, and Mistress Dean begins gradually entrusting you with the training of the household's newest arrivals, a nervous girl named Frances, barely 15, whose hands shake at the starch copper exactly the way your own once did, whose eyes go wide with the same fear you remember carrying through the gate on your first terrified afternoon. You'll learn the rules before you learn anything else, you tell her, and you hear, with something between amusement and a strange ache of recognition, Mistress Dean's own words coming out of your mouth almost unaltered, worn smooth now by your own turn at repeating them. Because the rules are the only thing standing between you and the end of your position here. Is it true, Frances asks you one evening, low enough that no one else in the laundry room can hear, that a girl once saw the Queen without her paint, that she was sent away that very hour and no one spoken her name since? You think of the 2 girls who vanished within days of that September morning, of the rule about silence drilled into you before you'd even learned to hold a poking stick properly, and you understand that some version of the story has already begun the slow transformation into legend, the way every true and dangerous thing eventually does in a household built as much on rumour as on labour. I couldn't say, you tell her, and watch her accept the answer exactly the way you once accepted every careful non-answer offered to you by women who knew far more than they were willing to share. Learn your starch, Frances. That's the only story worth your attention right now. The Earl of Essex's own story ends the way court whispers had been quietly predicting for over a year, though when it finally happens in the early days of 1601, it happens fast enough to leave the whole household reeling regardless of how much warning the rumours had given. He raises men in the city itself, marches them through London streets shouting that his enemies mean to murder him and sell England to Spain, and finds within hours that the crowds who once adored him will not follow him into open treason against the woman who made him. The rebellion collapses before nightfall. He is in the Tower within days, tried within weeks, and in February of that year, on a scaffold you never see, in a city you are not present in, the Earl who once burst uninvited through the most guarded door in England answers, at last and fully, for every line he ever crossed. You learn of his execution the way you've learned every other piece of great news that touches this household without directly touching your own hands, second-hand in fragments, passed down through a chain of servants until it reaches the laundry passage a full day after it happened, in fact. You think, hearing it, of the man kneeling on the privy chamber floor with mud still on his boots, and of the Queen's face in the instant before fury replaced shock, and you understand, with the particular clarity that comes only from years spent close enough to power to see its true cost without ever holding any of it yourself, that whatever grief the Queen carries over that final scaffold, she carries it the same way she has carried everything else in 4 decades of rule, behind a wall built layer by careful layer, out of sight, unwitnessed by anyone not trusted enough or unlucky enough to see behind it. The years that follow settle into a rhythm you've come, against every expectation you carried through the gate as a frightened 17-year-old, to think of as something close to home. You rise eventually to Mistress Dean's own position, when age finally persuades her toward a quieter life on a small property she's spent 2 decades' wages purchasing outright, and you find yourself, on your first morning, giving the household's new arrival's speech at the low door of the laundry passage, reciting rules you once received as a stranger to a fresh crop of frightened girls who look at you the exact way you once looked at the woman who trained you, as someone who has survived something they haven't yet begun to understand. The Queen ages the way any mortal woman ages, though the household spends her final years pretending, with the same practiced unanimity it has always brought to guarding her secrets, that this particular truth isn't happening in plain sight of everyone who dresses her each morning. You watch it happen the way you've watched everything else in this world, through the small telling details nobody speaks of directly. The mask takes longer to apply now, not because Mistress Alcock's successor has grown careless, but because the face beneath it has grown more resistant to the illusion, more lines to smooth, more shadows to correct, more careful attention required to hold together a performance that has been running without pause for over 4 decades. You are past 40 yourself by the winter of 1602, a woman who has spent more than half her life inside these walls, who has trained more frightened girls than she can easily count, whose own hands carry the same small constellation of pale burn scars Bess once showed you on your very first day. Proof of survival written directly into skin the way it was written into hers. The Queen's final illness, when it comes, arrives the way you understand, from everything you've absorbed over a quarter century of court proximity, that such things often arrive for the very old and very tired, not as a single dramatic collapse, but as a slow, steady withdrawal. A woman who has spent her entire adult life performing strength for the benefit of a nation finally, quietly, allowing herself to stop. You're not in the room when she dies, in the last hours of March the 24th, 1603, at Richmond Palace, in the small hours of a night the whole household will remember for the rest of their lives, as the night the world they had built their entire existence around simply ended. You are, instead, exactly where you have spent nearly your whole life being, 1 floor below the history actually happening, in a laundry passage grown suddenly and strangely useless, the coppers cold, the starch unmixed, because for the first time in 26 years of service, there is no morning toilette to prepare for, No ruff to stiffen for a presence chamber that will never again hold the woman it was built around. Word reaches you the way word has always reached you, second-hand, breathless, carried down through the household's ancient chain of whispers by a page too young to fully understand the weight of what he's announcing. The Queen is dead. A new king rides south from Scotland to claim a throne that has sat empty of any certain heir for longer than most of the household has been alive to remember. Everything is about to change, and none of you, standing frozen in the cold laundry room absorbing the news, have the faintest idea yet what that change will actually require of you. You think, standing there, of the morning you arrived at Nonsuch's gate as a terrified 17-year-old with mud on your shoes, and your whole future balanced on Mistress Dean's willingness to give you a chance. You think of the 400 folds in a single ruff, learned one careful poking stick burn at a time. You think of the locked door to the second room, the smell of ceruse and vinegar, Mistress Alcock's steady hands and steadier voice, explaining that the shame belonged to England, not to the woman hiding decades of hard-won rule behind a careful mask of paint. You think most of all of one unguarded second in a privy chamber doorway, a face utterly without its armour, and the terrible human vulnerability you saw there that no ruff or wig or careful layer of lead-white paste could ever fully protect against. The vulnerability, in the end, of simply being mortal, of carrying the whole enormous weight of a kingdom inside a body that grows old and tired exactly like every other body, crown or no crown, paint or no paint. The new king's household, when it finally arrives to take possession of the palaces you've spent your whole adult life keeping, brings its own rules, its own hierarchies, its own frightened new girls walking through gates they don't yet understand. You are asked, in the strange, uncertain weeks of transition, whether you'll stay on under the new arrangements, and you find, to your own quiet surprise, that you say yes almost before the question finishes being asked, not out of any particular loyalty to a king you've never met, but because this work, this exact particular skill of starch and silence and careful invisible labour, has become so completely woven into who you are that you can no longer easily imagine a life built around anything else. There is one more evening from those years you find yourself returning to more often than any other, in the quiet hours when your own body finally allows itself to rest. It comes not from the great dramatic centres of the story you've lived through, not the September morning, not the cold March night the old Queen died, but from an ordinary Tuesday deep in your middle years of service, the kind of evening that would have vanished entirely from memory if it hadn't happened to fall, by pure chance, on the exact anniversary of your own arrival at that first terrifying gate. You're sitting with Francis, no longer the trembling 15-year-old who once asked you in a frightened whisper whether a girl had really been sent away for seeing too much, but a steady young woman of 19 now, 3 years into her own service, trusted with the yellow starch you once fumbled so badly on your very first morning. The two of you are alone in the laundry room after the evening fires have been banked, sharing the particular comfortable silence of two people who have worked hard enough together, long enough together, that conversation has become optional rather than necessary. "Do you remember," Frances asks eventually, turning a poking stick slowly in her hands, testing its residual warmth against her palm the way you taught her, being afraid you wouldn't last the month? You almost laugh, though it isn't really funny, not exactly. It's something closer to tender. The particular ache of watching someone else stand exactly where you once stood, carrying the exact same fear you carried, not yet knowing whether it will harden into skill or simply break them the way it broke so many other girls whose names you've long since stopped being able to recall. Every single day, you tell her honestly, not just the first month, longer than that. You don't stop being afraid of failing here. You just get better at working while you feel it. You realise, saying it, that you're quoting Bess almost word for word, the exact sentence she offered you on your own first exhausting day at the starched copper, and something about that continuity, the words passing down through the household's quiet chain of women the same way the skills themselves pass down, hand to hand, burn scar to burn scar, settle something in your chest that you don't have an easy name for. Not quite pride. Something steadier than pride. Something closer to belonging. What was the worst of it, Francis asks. The thing you were most afraid of before you understood how any of it worked. You think about this honestly in turning the question over the way you've turned over so many hard questions across a quarter century in these rooms. You think of the ruined Ruff and Marjorie's careful performance of sympathy, of the fire that nearly took the whole drying rack, of the locked door and the smell of vinegar and lead, of one unbearable second in a doorway you were never meant to be standing near. You think, too, of every ordinary exhausting day between those larger moments, the 400 folds, the aching forearms, the endless careful repetition that never once, across all your years here, stopped requiring your whole undivided attention. I think, you say slowly, that I was most afraid in the beginning that failing here would mean I'd failed at something small and unimportant. A ruff, a stain, a moment's carelessness with a candle. It took me longer than it should have to understand that nothing here is actually small. Every fold, every stitch, every careful hour in that locked room. It all adds up to something enormous, even if no one who benefits from it ever sees the hands that made it possible. I wish someone had told me that plainly my first week here, instead of letting me learn it the slow, frightened way. The work isn't small just because it's invisible. Sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes the most important labour in the whole building is exactly the labour nobody upstairs ever has to think about. Francis considers this in silence for a while, the poking stick still turning slowly between her fingers. "Do you think anyone will remember us?" she asks eventually. "Not the Queen. Us, the women who actually did the work." You don't have a comforting answer for her, not really, and you've learned, across enough years in this world, not to offer false comfort where honest uncertainty would serve better. You think of your own mother's hands back in Kent, cracked from years at a washtub no grander than any farmhouse basin, work that fed a family but never once touched the edges of history the way this palace's laundry does, and you wonder whether the difference actually matters as much as it seems to from inside these walls, or whether every woman's hands, wherever she labours, carry the same essential weight of care that no one above her ever quite learns to see. "I don't know," you say. I doubt it, if I'm honest. Nobody writes down the names of laundresses, but I don't think that means the work didn't matter, Francis. I think it means the mattering and the remembering are two entirely different things, and only a very lucky few of us ever get both. You sit with that a while longer, the two of you, in the cooling dark of a laundry room that has swallowed and shaped so much of both your lives, and eventually Francis rises, banks what little warmth remains in the coals, and heads up toward the garret to sleep, and you follow not long after, your own bones aching in the particular deep, familiar way they always ache by evening now, a permanent record of every year you've spent bent over a copper or crouched close to a hot stick, setting one careful fold after another into fabric that will be worn once, admired briefly by people who never once think to wonder about the hands that made it possible, and then unpicked and starched fresh for the next occasion, over and over, for as long as a queen requires a court to dress her for. There's a particular danger in the wig room that no one warns you about until you're already elbow deep in it, and it isn't the danger of ruined work or wasted materials, though those threats never fully disappear either. It's the danger of proximity, the sheer physical closeness the work demands, hour after hour, to a woman who could end your position with a single displeased word, and who spends more unguarded time in that room, hairpiece half-pinned and temper often thin from a morning already crowded with council business and foreign letters, than in almost any other chamber of the palace. Mistress Alcock teaches you the wig work in your second year. Once she's satisfied your hands have grown steady enough with the paint to be trusted near something even more visible, even more immediately catastrophic if it goes wrong. The hairpieces themselves are heavier than you expect the first time you're handed one. Human hair, mostly, though some of the fuller pieces are woven through with silk thread to add body, mounted on a base of stiffened linen and wire shaped, over years of adjustment, to sit exactly where it needs to sit against a head that has grown, with age, less forgiving of any shift in balance. You set the pins from the crown outward, Mistress Alcock tells you, guiding your hand with her own steadier one around the practice stand. Never the reverse, because a pin set wrong at the crown shows through every layer built above it, and there is no layer built above the crown to hide a mistake made there. Small movements. You're not forcing the piece into position, you're coaxing it, the way you'd coax a nervous horse rather than drag it. Your fingers cramp within the first quarter hour. The particular ache of holding a pin steady between thumb and forefinger for the dozens of small, precise placements a single piece requires, and you understand, working through it, why the household values steady hands over strength in this room the way it never quite does in the laundry. There is no brute force version of this task, no shortcut through sheer effort the way you can sometimes muscle a stubborn fold of linen into shape with enough determined pressure. Every pin here demands the same careful attention as the last, no matter how many hundred have come before it. The first time you're required to work directly at the Queen's own dressing table, rather than on a practice stand in the privacy of the locked room, your hands shake so badly that Mistress Alcock has to step in and finish the final adjustment herself, murmuring under her breath the whole while in a tone pitched too low for the Queen, seated 3 feet away discussing some matter of state with a secretary who has been granted rare permission to attend her during the toilette hour to overhear. "Breathe," Mistress Alcock whispers. "She is not looking at you. She is not thinking about you at all. You are furniture in this room, Fenwick, and furniture that does not tremble. You breathe. You steady your hands by sheer force of will, the way you steadied them that very first day over the starch copper, and you finish the placement without disaster, though it takes every ounce of concentration you possess and leaves you drenched in a cold sweat that has nothing to do with the room's temperature. It is in this same room, months later, that you first witness the household's other great invisible fear made suddenly, briefly visible. Not the fear of scorched linen or crooked pins, but the older, deeper fear that runs beneath every plate of food and every cup poured for the Queen's own use. A server arrives one morning with the small covered dish of comfrey water, always kept ready for the final stage of the toilette, and Mistress Alcock, rather than accepting it directly, waves over the taster stationed permanently outside the privy chamber door for exactly this purpose. A thin, watchful man whose entire function in this vast household is to consume a small measure of anything destined for the Queen's mouth, or, in certain sensitive preparations, her skin, and wait, in full view of everyone present, for any sign that something has gone fatally wrong. You watch him swallow the small measured taste, watch the room hold its breath for the count of a slow 100 that Mistress Alcock counts under her breath. Watch the visible release of tension when he nods, unharmed, and the dish is finally passed forward for its intended use. Every day, Mistress Alcock murmurs to you afterward, when the room has returned to its normal, careful rhythm. Every single thing that touches her, someone tastes first, someone else inspects, someone else again seals and guards between the kitchen and this room. You'll think, working here long enough, that it's excessive, that surely nobody is patient enough or clever enough to slip poison past that many careful eyes. And then you'll remember how many men have already tried, across her whole reign, and you'll understand why we never once relax the watching, no matter how tedious it becomes to count to 100 over a dish of comfrey water that will almost certainly turn out, as it does every single morning, to be exactly what it claims to be. You carry that lesson with you the same way you carry every other lesson this household has taught you, filed away beneath the surface of your daily work, rarely spoken of directly, but always present, a low hum of vigilance running under even the most routine hours, because you have learned, across your years here, that the routine hours are exactly where the household's carefully maintained safety is built, one small unglamorous act of watchfulness at a time. Winter, across all your years in this household, never once grows easier on the body the way you'd hoped it eventually would. The cold finds its way into the laundry passage regardless of how many fires burn in the coppers, because the room is built for heat close to the flame and bitter draught everywhere else. And by your 4th or 5th winter your knuckles have taken on a permanent redness that only fully fades in high summer, cracked at the joints from the endless cycle of scalding water and freezing air. Your hands move between a dozen times an hour. You learn to recognize the particular ache of chilblains along your fingers before you have a name for it. A deep, itching burn that settles into skin repeatedly warmed too fast after being too cold too long, and you learn, from the older women who've carried the same marks for decades longer than you have, the small remedies that make the ache bearable without ever quite curing it. Goose grease worked into the skin at night, wool gloves with the fingertips cut away so you can still work the pins and poking sticks. The particular discipline of never plunging hands straight from ice-cold rinse water into the heat of the copper without a slow, careful warming between the two. Your back, too, carries its own accumulating record of the years, the particular curve that settles into a spine spent decades bent over low work tables, the ache that greets you each morning before you've even fully woken. Familiar now in the way an old friend's voice is familiar, unwelcome but no longer frightening. You watch it happen to every woman who lasts long enough in this trade to grow old in it, the same slow reshaping of the body around the exact motions the work demands, until you can tell, sometimes simply from the particular set of a stranger's shoulders passing through a market square, that she has spent her life bent over a similar low table, doing similar careful, unglamorous work. And still, through all of it, the seasons keep their own relentless rhythm, indifferent entirely to the ache in your knuckles or the permanent stoop settling into your spine. Spring brings the progress and its exhausting logistics, its blistered feet and dust-choked lungs, and the particular fatigue of walking beside a laundry cart for 2 full days without proper rest. Summer brings heat that spoils the starch faster than you can mix it, and turns the low laundry room into something close to an oven, sweat running freely down your back beneath layers of wool. You cannot remove no matter how the temperature climbs, because propriety governs even the misery of a servant's summer. Autumn brings the return to winter quarters and a brief, grateful stillness before the cold sets in fully. And winter brings the chilblains, the goose grease, the particular discipline of hands that must stay steady and precise no matter how deeply the cold has worked into their joints. You come, across enough cycles of this, to understand something about endurance that you couldn't have grasped as a frightened 17-year-old standing at the gate with mud on your shoes. Endurance is not a single great act of courage, summoned once and then simply maintained. It is 10,000 small acts of showing up anyway. Hands that ache but keep moving, a back that protests but keeps bending, a mind that carries genuine fear but has learned. The way Bess promised you it would on your very first exhausting day, to let the fear ride alongside the work rather than stopping it. There is one more danger this household taught you to fear, and it has nothing to do with starch or paint or poison at all. It has to do with reputation, and how easily a young woman's whole future can be undone not by any mistake of her own hands, but by the mere suggestion of impropriety, whispered by the wrong tongue in the wrong ear at the wrong hour. You watch it happen to a girl named Alice Prynne in your 6th year of service, a wardrobe maid 2 years your junior, pretty in the particular open, unguarded way that draws attention in a household built entirely around the careful management of attention. A young gentleman attached to one of the visiting embassies takes to lingering near the wardrobe passage on his errands through the palace, finds excuses to exchange a few words with her whenever their paths cross, and Alice, flattered and lonely, and only 17, allows herself the small pleasure of being noticed by someone who isn't counting her mistakes or measuring her usefulness. Nothing improper happens between them. You believe this completely, having watched the whole slow, innocent unfolding of it yourself from your station 3 tables away. A few stolen minutes of conversation here, a compliment there, nothing more than what any young woman might reasonably enjoy from an admirer. But belief and proof are different currencies in this world, and reputation, you've learned by now, doesn't require actual wrongdoing to be destroyed. It only requires the appearance of it, observed by the wrong witness and repeated to the wrong ears. The wrong witness, in Alice's case, turns out to be a senior lady of the bedchamber, who dislikes the young gentleman's embassy for reasons rooted in some larger diplomatic tension you never fully understand, and who finds it convenient, politically, to suggest that a servant of the royal household has been conducting an indiscreet flirtation with a foreign visitor. The kind of suggestion that, once planted, grows roots faster than anyone can dig them out again. "I did nothing wrong," Alice says to you the night before she's sent away. Her voice raw from crying, she's tried and failed to hide from the rest of the garret room. "Joan, I swear to you nothing happened. A few words, that's all it ever was." "I know," you tell her, and you mean it completely, and it changes nothing at all about what's about to happen to her. It doesn't matter what actually happened, Alice. It only matters what it looked like, and who decided to make sure it looked like something worse than it was. She's gone by the following afternoon, sent home to a family that will hear only the version of the story that serves the lady who wanted her gone. No chance offered to explain, no inquiry conducted the careful way Mistress Dean once conducted her quiet investigation into the switched starch dishes. Some dangers in this house, you understand watching it happen. Don't play by the rules Mistress Dean taught you on your first terrified day. Some dangers come from above, wielded by people whose power makes inquiry itself impossible, and against those dangers there is no careful hand-washing ritual, no correct technique, no amount of skill or diligence that offers real protection. There is only the constant, exhausting vigilance of never giving anyone above you a single unnecessary reason to notice you at all. You carry that lesson forward more carefully than almost any other you've learned in this household, and you pass it down, in turn, to every frightened new girl who comes through your training in the years that follow. Not as a rule exactly, because it can't quite be reduced to a rule the way starch ratios or pin placement can, but as a kind of permanent low hum of caution that you teach mostly by example, by the particular careful distance you maintain from every courtier and page and visiting gentleman who might, with nothing more than a friendly word repeated by the wrong tongue, undo years of careful earned trust in a single afternoon. Let's return now to that garret room above the laundry passage, to the narrow bed you've slept in through every season this story has carried you across, because that is where you began tonight, and that is where you deserve to end. The candle on the small shelf beside your bed has burned down to little more than a stub, its light guttering low and orange against the sloped ceiling beams, close enough above you to touch if you had the strength left in your arm to reach for them. Frances is asleep in the bed across the narrow room, her breathing slow and even, the particular deep stillness of someone whose body has finally, after a long hard day, been given permission to stop. Your own hands rest on the blanket, and in the dim light you can just make out their shape. The small pale scars from 100 forgotten burns, the permanent redness at the knuckles that never fully leaves even in high summer, the particular strength worked into fingers that have spent years learning the exact careful pressure a poking stick demands, no more, no less, precise as a held breath. These are not the hands of the frightened girl who arrived at Nonsuch's gate with mud on her shoes and her whole future balanced on one stranger's willingness to give her a chance. These are the hands of someone who stayed, someone who learned, someone who found, in the end, that the 4 weeks everyone warned her about were only ever the beginning of a much longer story, if she could just keep her hand steady long enough to reach it. You think about all the girls who didn't stay, the one on the overturned bucket in your first week, staring at nothing while her belongings were packed around her, the two who vanished within days of that unbearable September morning, carrying a piece of knowledge too dangerous to be allowed to linger anywhere near the household's careful, guarded silence. You think of Alison, whose station you inherited without ever learning what small mistake finally ended her service. You will never know most of their names. Not really. Not the way you know Bess's or Frances's or Mistress Dean's. They pass through this world the way so much invisible labour passes through history. Present, essential, and then simply gone, leaving behind nothing but a slightly worn groove in a wooden work table, a scar pattern some other girl's hands will eventually come to share. And you think, too, of the woman at the centre of it all, the queen whose face you saw for one unbearable, unguarded second, and never spoke of again to anyone beyond the careful, narrow account you gave Mistress Dean that same terrible evening. You think of the mask, built fresh every single morning for over 4 decades, layer over careful layer, vinegar and lead and egg-white gloss, an entire quiet industry of frightened, skilled women working in locked rooms so that one woman could walk into a presence chamber each day looking exactly as untouched by time as the whole of England needed her to look. You understand now in a way you couldn't possibly have understood as a girl too frightened to look directly at anyone above her station, that the mask and your own trembling hands over the starched copper were never really separate things. They were the same labour, wearing different names. The labour of holding something together that the world outside never sees straining to stay whole. You're warm enough tonight, fed enough, safe enough for tonight at least, in the particular fragile way safety exists inside a world built as much on fear as on skill. You have a roof over your head that doesn't leak, hands that ache but still work, a girl asleep across the room who will someday soon carry these same rules forward to some other frightened new arrival, standing at that same gate with mud on her shoes and her whole future uncertain. That's more than a lot of women in this world can say. That's enough. The sounds of the palace settle further into stillness around you. Somewhere below, a night watchman's slow footsteps cross a distant courtyard. Somewhere further still, the last banked embers of the laundry fires tick quietly as they cool. The same fires that will need coaxing back to full heat again in a few short hours, before dawn has even properly broken, because a household like this one never fully stops, only rests in careful shifts, the way a body rests one limb while another keeps working. You're tired enough tonight that you're enough, skilled enough, steady enough. You have hands that remember 400 folds without needing to count them anymore, and a heart that has learned to carry fear alongside its work rather than being stopped by it, and a place in this household that took years of careful, unglamorous labour to earn, and that no single mistake, not any more, can easily take away. Let it come then. Let the sleep that's been building in your limbs since the last cold hour of this long day finally take you the way it has taken every exhausted servant in every great house across every century. The small mercy at the end of labour too vast for any single person to carry alone. Let the ache in your shoulders soften. Let the cold in your knuckles fade beneath the blanket's gathering warmth. Let your thoughts, circling one last time through starch and paint and pins and one unforgettable doorway, slow and loosen, and finally let go. Tomorrow there will be more linen to starch. Tomorrow there will be more pins to set, more frightened new girls to train, more careful hours spent close to danger that never fully announces itself as danger until it's already arrived. Tomorrow the progress will begin again, or the winter cold will settle back into your joints, or some new small crisis will test your steady hands one more time, the way this world has tested them every single day since you first walked through that gate. But that's tomorrow. Right now there's only this, the narrow bed, the low beams close above you, the last dying light of a candle you're too heavy with sleep to reach for now. The steady, familiar breathing of the girl across the room, who is learning the same slow, careful way you once learned, that survival in a world like this one is never a single dramatic act of courage. It's 10,000 small, unglamorous acts of showing up again and again and again, until one day you look down and realize your hands have become steady without your ever quite noticing the moment it happened. Centuries will pass after tonight. The palace whose gates once seemed so impossibly grand to a frightened girl from Kent will crumble, eventually torn down and forgotten and rebuilt as something else entirely, its gilded plasterwork gone to dust long before anyone alive today draws their first breath. The starch will change, the fashions will change, ruffs will vanish from history's memory almost as completely as the women who once spent their whole aching lives keeping 400 folds precisely, invisibly perfect. Kings and queens will rise and fall in numbers too great to easily count, each one carried through their own version of this same quiet, unglamorous machinery of hidden hands and guarded doors and locked rooms nobody outside ever sees the inside of. But somewhere, in every one of those centuries, there will still be a girl like you were once, arriving somewhere new and frightening, with mud on her shoes and her whole uncertain future balanced on a stranger's willingness to give her one careful chance. And somewhere, in every one of those centuries, there will still be a woman like the one you've become, tired and steady and scarred in small, quiet ways, offering that same frightened girl the only thing that ever really mattered in a world like this one. Not comfort exactly, but company. The simple, sturdy knowledge that someone else has walked this exact hard road before her and survived it, and is standing close enough now to help her find her own way through. Some things don't change. The particular fear of being new somewhere, and small and easily replaced, that doesn't change. The quiet, hard-won pride of finally, after enough seasons of aching hands and careful attention, becoming someone who no longer trembles at the work, that doesn't change either. And the simple human need for rest, real rest, at the very end of a long and demanding day, the kind of rest that asks nothing more of you than to finally, fully let go, that never changes at all, not across any century, not for any woman in any household, however grand or however humble, however close to a crown or however far from one. So let it come. Let sleep take you the way it took Joan Fenwick in her garret room above the laundry passage, all those centuries ago, her hands finally still after a lifetime spent learning exactly how much careful pressure the world required of them. Let the palace fade. Let the fear quiet. Let your thoughts slow and soften, and finally, gently, stop. You've earned this rest. Every ache in your hands earned it. Every year of careful, invisible labour earned it. Every frightened new girl you ever guided safely through her own first terrifying month earned it right alongside you. Take it. You're safe enough. You're tired enough. You are, after everything this long story has carried you through, exactly enough. And that quiet, hard-earned certainty is worth more tonight than any crown, any mask, any careful architecture built to hide what a body has actually lived through to arrive at rest. And dream, if you dream at all tonight, of nothing more demanding than this: a warm bed, a low ceiling, the soft, steady breathing of someone else close by in the dark, and the quiet certainty, hard-won across years you never once expected to survive, that you belong exactly where you've ended up. Good night.